تمام.
أهلا وسهلا، صباح الخير للجميع. نرحب بالضيوف من الشخصيات الأكاديمية والفكرية والفعاليات النسوية والشبابية المشاركة معنا من الضفة الغربية وقطاع غزة ومن الشتات أيضا، وبممثلي البعثات الدبلوماسية المشاركين في هذه الورشة اللي بتيجي في إطار مشروع مستقبل القضية الفلسطينية في ضوء تطورات المحلية والإقليمية والدولية اللي بنفذه مركز مسارات بالشراكة مع مؤسسة فريدرش إيبرت الألمانية. ونوجه بهذه المناسبة أيضا يعني التهاني لفوز الديمقراطيين الاشتراكيين، وإن كان بفارق ضئيل في الانتخابات الألمانية الأخيرة، ونأمل أن يشكل ذلك فاتحة من أجل مزيد من السياسات الأوروبية الداعمة للحقوق الفلسطينية المشروعة. نستضيف في هذه الورشة التي تتناول دور الاتحاد الأوروبي تجاه القضية الفلسطينية السيد العزيز سفين بورغسدورف، ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي في فلسطين، ونشكره على يعني حضوره وحرصه على يعني تقديم وجهة نظر الاتحاد الأوروبي من جهة، وكذلك الاستماع إلى وجهات النظر الفلسطينية، وخصوصا من الشباب الذين يشاركون معنا اليوم في قطاع غزة. سوف أقوم بإدارة هذه الورشة بالشراكة مع الدكتور عماد أبو رحمة، منسق المشروع والمستشار في مركز مسارات في قطاع غزة. وكذلك يعني سوف نستمع إلى الضيف الرئيسي في هذه الورشة لمدة 15 دقيقة، ومن ثم سوف أحاوره بسؤالين أو ثلاثة، ثم ننقل المجال للاستماع إلى الأسئلة بدءا من قاعة قطاع غزة ومن ثم يعني الضفة الغربية. من يريد التحدث يستطيع أن يرفع يده من خلال ريز هاند أو أن يعني يسجل على الشات لأنه يطلب الحديث. سوف نحرص على أن ننهي في خلال ساعة ونصف هذه الورشة حتى لا نثقل يعني عليكم ولا على الضيف في ظل انشغالاته يعني العديدة. قبل أن نستمع إلى الضيف سوف نستمع إلى كلمتين ترحيبيتين من مدير عام مركز مسارات الأستاذ هاني المصري، ومن ثم من الدكتور أسامة عنتر في قطاع غزة وهو مدير برامج مؤسسة فريدرش إيبرت في قطاع غزة. تفضل أستاذ هاني. ارفع الميوت.
صباح الخير جميعا. أرحب بالصديق سيفن ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي الذي تربطنا معه علاقات ممتدة منذ توليه هذا المنصب، وكان هناك تعاون مثمر مع الاتحاد الأوروبي بتنفيذ مشروع مميز تحدث وتناول موضوع السيناريوهات التي تواجه القضية الفلسطينية والسياسات التي يجب اعتمادها بناء على هذه السيناريوهات، وتقديم مبادرات ونماذج تطبيقية تدل على أن التوصيات التي انتهى إليها المشروع قابلة للتطبيق. الورشة اليوم تأتي في تتويجا لسلسلة من الورشات تناولت يعني مستقبل القضية الفلسطينية في ظل التطورات المحلية والإقليمية والدولية، وهو مشروع منفذ من مركز مسارات بالشراكة مع مؤسسة فريدرش إيبرت الألمانية. الهدف من هذا المشروع هو التعرف على ما تعيشه القضية الفلسطينية وكيفية مواجهة التحديات والمخاطر وتوظيف الفرص المتاحة. وفي هذا السياق دور الاتحاد الأوروبي مهم جدا، مهم نظرا لوزنه ومكانته العالمية، ومهم بوصفه من أكبر المانحين للسلطة والمؤيدين للحقوق الفلسطينية. وهذا الدور بحاجة طبعا إلى تطوير بحيث يتم الاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية وممارسة الضغط أكثر على إسرائيل حتى توقف سياساتها وإجراءاتها، وخصوصا توسيع الاستعمار الاستيطاني التي تعمق مثلما تعمق الاحتلال بمختلف أشكاله، وبالتالي العمل على إنهاء الاحتلال وتطبيق القانون الدولي وقرارات الشرعية الدولية بهذا الخصوص. هذا دور مهم. لعب الاتحاد السوفيتي دور مهم في موضوع الانتخابات الفلسطينية، ونأمل أن يواصل يعني هذا الدور، وكذلك في مسألة الدفاع عن الحقوق والحريات في الأراضي الفلسطينية، وهذا أيضا نثمنه، ونحن بحاجة إلى أكثر، لأن الوضع الفلسطيني ليس فقط قضية وطنية وإنما قضية إنسان له احتياجات مختلفة. أتمنى أن تكون هذه الورشة كما نتأمل وحسب التخطيط الموضوع لها. أشكركم مرة أخرى على حضوركم، وإلى اللقاء.
شكرا. تفضل الدكتور أسامة عنتر.
صباح الخير للجميع. شكرا عزيز أستاذ خليل، أستاذ هاني المصري. بسعدنا جدا ألقي التحية أيضا على السيد سبين كوهن فون بوركسوف ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي. بسعدنا أتكلم كلمة صغيرة على مسامعكم باسم مؤسسة فريدرش الألمانية بحق دور الاتحاد الأوروبي. لمن لا يعرفه دور كبير جدا، ليس فقط دور مالي كما يعتقد البعض، ولكن الاتحاد الأوروبي باعتباره إلى حد كبير وحامل القانون الدولي استطاع أن يمارس نوع من السياسة ليس فقط منذ حقبة أوسلو ومن قبل ذلك، في نوع من دعم للقضية الفلسطينية باتجاهات مختلفة. يقال بأن الاتحاد الأوروبي باير الناتف لاير، أنه فقط بيدفع أموال ولا يمارس سياسة. متبع للأمر لا، الاتحاد الأوروبي كانت هي القوانين والقرارات التي أصدرها واللي أجبر بشكل غير مباشر على الإدارة الأمريكية أنها تعترف أيضا بالمنظمة سابقا، وبعد ذلك إجراء حوار، وبعد ذلك مباحثات السلام. نأمل في تطور هناك في القضية في الوضع الإقليمي والدولي العام، أن يكون هناك دور أيضا مرة أخرى للاتحاد الأوروبي، خاصة ونحن نعيش في ظل إدارة بايدن المتقبلة لمفهوم حل الدولتين. شكرا لجميع حضوركم، شكرا للمتحدث السيد فوكستون.
شكرا دكتور أسامة. نعطي المجال الآن للسيد سفين لنستمع إليه لمدة 15 دقيقة، ونشكر مرة أخرى على إتاحة المجال للمشاركة في هذه الورشة. تفضل.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Khalid. Thank you very much, Mr. Hani Masri. Dear colleagues, a special word of appreciation to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Hanan Nasser, chairman of the CEC, whom I admire a lot. And I will talk about his job in the course of, I guess, the questions I will receive from the audience. I have not recorded or prepared a speech. That is not my style. Those who know me know that I speak freely, but I will of course speak in the context of my assignment as the European Union representative to the occupied Palestinian territory on UNRWA, meaning I am not freelancing here. I do represent official positions of the European Union, but I'm very happy to receive questions from the audience, from this distinguished audience, and to the best of my knowledge, I will of course respond to them. Be mindful of my role as a diplomat here, but also you can count on frank exchanges, and I challenge you to challenge me, to challenge the EU as far as you see our action in the occupied Palestinian territory. Not just during my stay here, I came here in 2020, basically with the trumpets of the Trump plan in January 2020, and then had to live through the period of the annexation agreement between then Minister Gantz and Prime Minister Netanyahu, which then fell apart and led into the normalization agreements with a number of Arab countries. Then came COVID, then came the euphoria of elections being suddenly the key word for and facilitating the rapprochement, the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas and trying to unify the Palestinian leadership. That was cancelled on the 30th of April 2021 to the dismay of many people. And then came the eruption of violence, 11 days, Gaza, terrible incidents. including incidents in East Jerusalem. And ever since, we are in a situation of limbo state. Throughout this period, we saw a change in administration in Washington. So far, we can say that the Biden administration in Washington has not formulated a clear policy towards the Middle East and solving the Middle East peace, or addressing the Middle East peace process and solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So throughout these 18 or 20 months I was referring to, at least you had one stable partner you could count on, that was the European Union. The European Union did not abandon the Palestinian people, neither during the Trump years nor ever since. We maintained our financial commitments of an average of 300 million euros throughout the past 10 years. There is right now a technical issue because of the problem of adopting a multi-financial framework 21-27, which is the necessary legal, political, and financial commitment to the Palestinian people. And this commitment is in the making, but together with other partners in the neighborhood policy realm, Syria, Lebanon, or Morocco, and others, we have a delay in getting these funds approved in Brussels at headquarters level. That's the reason why so far in 2021, we were not able to pay out any significant amount. I can come to that later if need be, but there was a bit of polemics around this topic in the past few weeks, notably in the Palestinian press. I'm very happy to clarify this issue. But what I wanted to stay as you had with the EU a steadfast partner supporting the Palestinian cause and recalling the importance of maintaining and upholding, respecting international human rights law, international humanitarian law under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and international law in general. That is the yardstick. That is basically our guiding paradigm, which against which we can measure our actions here. Throughout the past 27 years of our presence here in the occupied Palestinian territory, and you know I have an office here in Jerusalem, I have another office in Gaza. Throughout these past 27 years, we very much believed in the premise of supporting the building of a Palestinian state as a necessary precondition for creating an independent, a viable, a contiguous, and last but not least, and I say last but not least, democratic Palestinian state. All these four key attributions to a Palestinian, future Palestinian state are still progress and process in the making. What we have been doing with our financial support, but also diplomatic outreach and international engagements, including before international fora at the United Nations, etc., is trying to make this a plausible reality. I think we have to be fair to say that we as international community failed in respecting and promoting and living up to the agreement which Israel, in the name of that time of the Prime Minister, and then the PLO in the name of the Palestinian people, signed in '93 and thereafter under the Oslo and Paris protocols. The assumptions we made that indeed over the next 5 years after signing Oslo, we would have a transfer of authority from the Israeli side to the Palestinian side did not materialize. And I think it's fair to say that we as international community did not take the necessary measures to hold to account those who objected to passing on the sovereignty and those who objected to living up to the stipulations under the Oslo and Paris Protocol. However, the European Union continued to be the major supporter of the Palestinian state building process, the major supporter of democratization throughout the territory, the major supporter, and during many years also with the US, of supporting civil society. مسارات and many other players in the civil society, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, but also in Israel, are beneficiaries of our support. We believe in the necessity to build an independent and authentic, a strong civil society. Because without that civil society, you cannot hold accountable those who govern. This is one challenge. Civil society is an important player, but it's not sufficient. There is another important player, and that is that in order to hold accountable a government, you need a parliament. And that has been missing ever since 2007 for sure, and probably even before. So actually for the past 14 years or so, we have seen a presidential decree, the regime establishing itself in the West Bank, disconnected from Gaza, without proper accountability mechanism, which only a parliament can provide. And the same is true, of course, for Gaza, where the de facto authorities maintain a regime without any accountability whatsoever, according to democratic principles or human rights established principles. So this is the situation we face today. And the challenge, of course, for any partner wishing to see an independent, contiguous, democratic Palestinian state is how to overcome that. And I would like to, of course, listen to the audience and try to reply to them according to these questions, because that is the key question. Allow me to frame two questions to the audience I would like to discuss with you. How do you see now the eventual or possible opening after the establishment of a new Israeli coalition government, with Bennett and Lapid being basically the actual and then the to-be prime minister, and Gaza's speech of Foreign Minister Lapid recently, where he basically proposed offer more economic livelihood opportunities in exchange for more security? How do you see this? Are there any openings? And secondly, how do you see the need for reforming the PA, and what are the prospects for bringing the PA back to Gaza under preferably a democratically legitimized, unified Palestinian leadership as a result of popular vote? These are challenges you face. These are challenges we face, the EU faces. I'd like to learn from you what you think the EU can do better and more to do this. Let me say one last thing about what I would call realpolitik. Many people here have followed me throughout the past 18 or 19 months of my stay here. And many said, yes, you're saying the right thing, great talk, but when do you walk the talk? And that is a very legitimate question. And here about realpolitik, the European Union is a construct which is sui generis, which is unique in the world. It depends on the consensus of all 27 member states to give it the power and the capacity to speak with one voice. Under the European Union's foreign and security and defense policy, we need that consensus. And that is the basic problem why sometimes people think, well, you talk the right thing, but you don't walk it, because we need 27 to agree on it. And these 27 member states do have at times differing and distinct views on how to deal with this conflict. So that in a way explains why sometimes we appear as a bit too late, too little, or not enough. But it's not because we have a different position on the matter, because our ability to act upon it is constrained by the modus operandi of decision-making in the EU. In other policy areas, in agriculture, in trade, and others, where the decision-making modus operandi has been communitized, has been brought together, we can act quick, we can act with one voice. But on foreign and defense policy, we need to convince every single member state. I do this on a regular basis here in the context of my European Union heads of mission meetings. I have 22 or 23 heads of mission here representing respective missions. We meet every 2 weeks in my residence and talk about it. We try to forge consensus. We try to develop a common analysis. We try to identify common messaging. And that is important, but it is a very laborious, a very tedious, a very cumbersome process. But that is part and parcel of the DNA of the European Union. So for those who are not sort of specialists and experts on EU decision-making, rest assured, we do our utmost within the legal and political constraints under which we operate. We are not the United States of Europe. We are not. We don't have one president who takes the decision and then things go. We have to convince 27 member states every day. And that's the challenge we're facing. So don't please think that we are ignorant, obnoxious. No, we are not. We fully support the Palestinian cause. We fully want to implement international law and international law relief obligations. but our ability to do so is a daily work. So that is enough, I think, from my side. I'm very happy to respond to all questions and queries you might have. Thank you again for having me on this call. Thank you to مسارات for doing such a great job. I'm very pleased to have you as a partner in our field here. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا على هذه المداخلة اللي حاولت انه فعلا انها تلامس القضايا الأساسية ربما التي تدور في ذهن الفلسطينيين بشكل خاص تجاه الدور الأوروبي. لما الفلسطينيين ينتقدوا أوروبا احنا بنقول بالعشم بالفلسطيني، بمعنى أنه هناك أمل فلسطيني بأن يتطور دور الاتحاد الأوروبي وأن ينتقل من الشجب وإعلان المواقف، وكثير منها مواقف واضحة، إلى اتخاذ إجراءات رادعة للسياسات الاستيطانية التي تسعى لاستمرار تعميق الاحتلال والاستيطان. لكن من أجل دعم يعني الفلسطينيين أكثر فأكثر، في هناك موقف معلن من الاتحاد الأوروبي بدعم إنهاء الانقسام الفلسطيني واستعادة وحدة النظام السياسي الديمقراطي الفلسطيني. وأعتقد أن السيد سفين بشكل خاص ربما في كل مرة يعني أسمعه يتحدث أو أقرأ له تصريحات ويؤكد دائما على ضرورة إنهاء الانقسام وبناء نظام سياسي فلسطيني ديمقراطي وشرعي وموحد. ولكن ألا تعتقد بأنه يعني استمرار التمسك بشروط اللجنة الرباعية الدولية ووضع فيتو بشكل أو بآخر على يعني مشاركة حركة حماس بأي حكومة وحدة وطنية فلسطينية يمكن أن يشكل أحد العوائق على الأقل ذات التأثير على القرار الفلسطيني فيما يتعلق بالمضي في تشكيل حكومة وحدة وطنية؟ بتقديرك إلى أي مدى يعني أو ما هو الموقف الذي يمكن أن يتخذه الاتحاد الأوروبي في حال شكل الفلسطينيون حكومة وحدة وطنية بمشاركة شخصيات من حركة حماس وربما فصائل فلسطينية أخرى؟ تفضل.
Thank you very much, Khalil. This is a fantastic question. No, honestly, I appreciate that. Plus, it goes to the heart of the problem here. Now, let me say the following. The quartet principles are actually pretty much identical with the PLO principles, meaning what the Palestinian leadership has signed up to in order to be able to negotiate international level the future of, as I said, a contiguous, viable, democratic Palestinian state. It simply says that we want, and so says the PLO, and so says the quartet, we want to have Palestinian political partners and interlocutors who A, abide by international law, who do recognize the right of Israel to exist, as was also approved by the United Nations Security Council in 1937 and ever since thereafter, and who renounce violence as a means to pursue political objectives. This, I think, are three fundamental principles of international law. So there's nothing unique about it. Now, in that way, I think we can agree to that, and the PLO agreed to that. PLO is the representative of the Palestinian people across the world. The PLO has decided to build. Now, there are some factions and parties, including Hamas, who do not agree to all elements of that. You know, by the way, this is not a static thing. This is dynamic. Positions of factions of parties change over time. Today, we have in Northern Ireland a peace process where erstwhile enemies and so-called labeled terrorist organizations are part and parcel of the political mainstream. The same goes in Northwest Spain with ETA and the Basque movement. So there are peace processes in the heart of Europe where over time, because of engagement, because of mainstreaming, because of allowing democratic discussion to take place, because of tolerance between the different factions, it was able to, in a way, pacify the discourse and make it sure that the political ambitions are channeled through political and peaceful means. So I will never, ever give up hope that this is not possible in Palestine either. Now comes the question of how can one foster, under the current situation, the integration of factions, including Hamas, into a unified Palestinian leadership. And here I think, Khalil and colleagues, the answer is very easy. when President Abbas issued the electoral law decree on the 15th of January 2021, he said in that law that those candidates on any of the lists participating in the general elections as candidates have to abide by the PLO principles. And everybody on these lists accepted that, including the list fielded by Hamas. Meaning the candidates as individuals, as political figures, abided by and signed up to the PLO principles. And that's exactly the same logic which, according to my understanding, would need to be applied when forming a unity government. Right? So any faction supporting any candidate for any ministerial post, health, education, finance, interior, culture, you name it, would need to abide by the PLO principles as an individual member of the government. And that's the key thing. Through that mechanism, you have the ability of forging unity, abiding by the PLO principles, and creating momentum for establishing the necessary consensus to overcome the divide between governance in the West Bank and governance in Gaza under unified leadership. But that is not enough. There's not enough to have an engineered, what I would call pre-established, power brokered, opportunistic agreement between Fatah and Hamas and other parties. We need more inclusion here. Other factions, and you know it, other factions who participated in the electoral contest, at least wanted to participate in the electoral contest of this year, also need to be integrated. And there is more. I think one of the key tasks of that unified Palestinian leadership, according to the principles I just outlined, would be to set a date for the elections, for certainly parliamentary and possibly later also presidential elections. This is part and parcel, this is terms of reference of this government. It's not just trying to bring the PA back to Gaza and try to work better on governance and helping the people in Gaza to have access to social services, economic livelihood opportunities, and security and safety. No, it is also to prepare the groundwork for a given period within which elections have to take place. I'll give you an example. In Sudan, for 2.5 years ago, there was a coalition between the military leadership, former allies of Omar al-Bashir, and a civilian opposition. And the agreement was that within 36 months, this unified government would need to hold elections. So why cannot we do the same thing? Why cannot a unity government established according to the principle I just outlined, say within 12 months, we are having elections here? What is the problematic about that? It addresses the unity aspect. It addresses the democratic legitimacy aspect. It addresses the aspect of bringing PA back to Gaza, and addresses the aspect of facilitating, enabling an effective and sustainable reconstruction of Gaza and improving the livelihood of the people there. And it would at least address, for many on this call and around across the Palestinian occupied territory, the legitimacy deficit the PA currently has. So, Khalil, that is my answer to that. Sorry for this lengthy answer, but I'm very happy to be challenged on that if you have better ideas on this matter.
شكرا. حتى نستفيد من الوقت سوف ننتقل الآن إلى غزة لنستمع إلى الأسئلة وربما المداخلات من الشباب. سنعطي الأولوية للشباب في هذه الورشة دون أن نتجاهل بالتأكيد الشخصيات يعني المهمة أيضا المشاركة معنا عبر زوم. أرجو من أي حدا بيتحدث في غزة من الشباب أن يعرف على نفسه، وأرجو من زملائنا في غزة أيضا أن يعملوا زوم بالكاميرا على المتحدث. أنقل المايك لزميلي الدكتور عماد في غزة. تفضل.
شكرا خليل، شكرا لكل المشاركين سواء في القاعة أو عبر زوم ولضيفك العزيز. الآن حنبدأ المداخلات، بدنا ناخذ 3 مداخلات من قاعة غزة وبعدين ننتقل لزوم لأنه العدد كبير كمان على زوم. بنأمل من المتحدث زي ما حكى زميلي خليل إنه يعرف عن نفسه أولاً، المداخلة لا تزيد عن 2 دقيقتين عشان نتيح أكبر فرصة ممكنة للمتحدثين. طيب مين حابب يتحدث؟ دكتورة سامية بتبدأ من عندك، تفضلي.
دكتورة بس تعالي لا تنقصتش الكاميرا عشان
صباح الخير للجميع سواء في قاعة غزة أو في قاعة رام الله. صباح الخير للضيف الكريم. أنا هحكي على عجالة في 3 نقاط. النقطة الأولى، أول حاجة أنا الدكتورة سامية الحسين أستاذ قانون دولي عام. النقطة الأولى، إلى متى الاتحاد الأوروبي راح يضل يدعم خيار حل الدولتين اللي يوم بعد يوم بيثبت فشله على حساب ضياع الحقوق الفلسطينية والأراضي الفلسطينية؟ والنقطة الثانية، أين كان أو لماذا لم يمارس الدور الاتحاد الأوروبي دور فعال في الضغط على إسرائيل في إجراء الانتخابات في القدس؟ يعني غياب دور الاتحاد الأوروبي في الضغط على إسرائيل في إجراء الانتخابات يعني كان واضح جدا وكان مؤسف. كنا نأمل من الاتحاد الأوروبي أن يمارس دور فعال أكبر في الضغط على إسرائيل من أجل إجراء الانتخابات. النقطة الثالثة ويمكن هي كمان مرتبطة بالنقطة الثانية، في عام 2006 تم إجراء الانتخابات الفلسطينية في غزة وفي الضفة وفازت حماس، ولكن للأسف تم مقاطعة نتائج هذه الانتخابات رغم إقرار الجميع بنزاهة هذه الانتخابات وقاطعوا حماس. أنا مش حماس بالمناسبة، وتم عدم التعاون مع حكومة حماس في غزة أو مع نتائج الانتخابات الفلسطينية، وكان هذا له دور في تعميق الانقسام الفلسطيني للأسف. لو جرت انتخابات إن شاء الله في المستقبل القريب وتكررت نفس النتائج، شو راح يكون موقف الاتحاد الأوروبي من هذه النتائج؟ وشكرا لكم.
شكرا لك دكتورة سامية. ممكن ربيع.
تحياتي للجميع وتحياتي للضيف العزيز. أنا ربيع أبو حطب، باحث في مركز مسارات. في ظل الحديث عن عدم رغبة أو نية إدارة الرئيس الأمريكي بايدن في تقديم أي مبادرات جديدة للسلام، هل هناك خطة أو مبادرة للاتحاد الأوروبي لتقديمها للمساعدة في إقامة وتحقيق الدولة الفلسطينية التي وصفتموها أنها يجب أن تكون متواصلة جغرافيا وما زال الاستيطان يتكرس ويقضي على هذا التواصل ويجب أن تكون مستقلة وديمقراطية، أم أن الأمر سيبقى مجرد دعم إنساني أو خطط على غرار خطة لبيب التي لا تتضمن إقامة دولة فلسطينية؟ شكرا.
شكرا لك ربيع. بدنا متحدث ثالث. ابراهيم تفضل.
يسعد صباحكم. ابراهيم جاسر، خريج بكالوريوس علوم سياسيه. طبعا كل الشكر والتقدير لمركز مسارات على اتاحه لنا الفرصه انه نتحدث كمنبر شبابي مع ممثل الاتحاد الاوروبي. انا مداخلتي ب3 نقاط رئيسيه سيد ستيفن. أول نقطة تتعلق في موضوع السياسة الخارجية للاتحاد الأوروبي تجاه قضية الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي من خلال تبني رؤية حل الدولتين. باعتقادي سيد ستيفن أن الاتحاد الأوروبي يتبنى رؤية حل الدولتين ولكنها يتبع سياسات غير منصفة بيننا وبين الإسرائيليين، بمعنى أنه يضع الجماعات الفلسطينية والحركات الإسلام السياسي والجماعات المسلحة تحت بند الإرهاب، بالمقابل أنه البند الثامن من المجلس الأمن كان يشرعن هذه الجماعات لأنه يتحدث عن حق الشعوب الواقعة تحت الاحتلال وممارس جميع أدوات النضال بما فيها العمل المسلح. بالمقابل إسرائيل يوميا بتقوم بمجازر بشعة، تقوم بسرقة الأراضي الفلسطينية وتتقول بالاستيطان. لم يكن هناك موقف فعلي على الأرض أكثر ما هو من موضوع شذب أو استنكار. هذا فيما يتعلق في السياسة. النقطة الثانية الاشتراطات اللي دائما بضعها الاتحاد الأوروبي على المؤسسات الغير الرسمية داخل النظام السياسي اللي هي المجتمع المدني، هي للأمانة سيد السبن هي شروط مستفزة. أنت كيف تطلب مني كمجتمع مدني بأتكلم عن قطاعات الشباب والمرأة وقطاعات ذوي الإعاقة وقطاعات تنموية داخل المجتمع الفلسطيني، بصير عملية ابتزاز. يجب عليك أن توقع على وثيقة نقل ضد الإرهاب، وهذا يتعارض مع قواعد القانون الدولي وحقوق الإنسان. شكرا.
شكرا لك إبراهيم. الآن بننقل خليل مداخلات من زوم وبعدين بنرجع ثاني للقاعة. تفضل خليل.
شكرا عماد. أنا عندي 3 طلبوا الحديث على التوالي، الأخ فراس بريوش والأخت هند خوري والدكتور عقل طقز. سنبدأ مع فراس وأرجو أن نلتزم بدقيقتين أيضا. تفضل فراس.
السلام عليكم، صوتي مسموع؟ تحياتي للجميع. بالنسبة لشرعية النظام السياسي يا أستاذ سفن، وللحكي للجميع، لا تستمد شرعية النظام السياسي من قرارات غير شرعية لأبو مازن المنتهية ولايته، الذي أنت اعترفت أن الانتخابات لم تحدث من 2007. قانون الطوارئ الذي يعتمد عليه السيد أبو مازن رئيس السلطة التنفيذية، الذي لا يملك حق إقرار وتغيير القانون الفلسطيني المصادق عليه بالقراءة الثالثة في المجلس التشريعي بأن قانون الانتخابات هو قانون فلسطيني. إذا أراد أحد أن يغير هذا القانون يجب أن يكون هناك مجلس تشريعي يشرع القوانين ويصوت بثلثي أعضاء المجلس لتغيير هذا القانون. السيد أبو مازن المنتهية ولايته في 2009 في شهر 1 لا يملك حق تغيير هذا القانون بقانون منتهية صلاحيته، وهو رئيس سلطة تنفيذية وليس رئيس مجلس تشريعي، ولا يمثل صلاحيات نظام سياسي ملكي أو نظام سياسي جمهوري، فهو لا يملك الولاية المطلقة بالقانون، ولا ليس لدينا نظام جمهوري لا استفتي عليه الشعب وأعطى صلاحيات لرئيس هذه الدولة أو الجمهورية أو هذا الملك الذي يملك صلاحيات مطلقة في تغيير القانون. لم يستفتى الشعب على هذا تغيير القانون في الانتخابات، ولا يوجد سلطة تشريعية أعطت مصادقة على قرارات أبو مازن. حسب القانون هو لا يملك هذه الصلاحية، وأنت تناقض نفسك من خلال أنك قلت أن هذا النظام ناقص الشرعية، وتأتي وتقول وتطلب من المجتمع الفلسطيني والمستقلين والحركات والفصائل أن تصادق على ما أراده منقوص الشرعية أبو مازن، والمصادقة على تبعية منظمة التحرير. منظمة التحرير فاقدة للشرعية لسببين: الأول أنه من تاريخ تأسيسها لم تأخذ شرعيتها من الشعب الفلسطيني، لم تجري هناك انتخابات في المجلس الوطني منذ تأسيسها في 64. أنت تجهل ما يحدث في فلسطين، وتأتي أنت والاتحاد الأوروبي لتدعم السلطة الفلسطينية التي تقمع الحريات، سلطة العتلات لحراسة أمن المستوطنات وقمع الحريات وقتل نزار بنات واختطاف الشاهد الوحيد الرئيسي في قضية نزار بنات، قضية إجرام واضحة وجريمة كاملة الأركان. تختطف السلطة الشاهد ابن عمه حسين بنات وتخفي شهادته، وأنت والاتحاد الأوروبي وألمانيا تقدم 100 مليون لهذه السلطة الذي لا تملك شرعية وليست منتخبة لا من الشعب الفلسطيني ولا غيره، وتقول أنك تريد أن تدعم الحريات. أي حريات أنت تريد أن تدعمها؟ أين هو الدعم للحريات؟ نحن مهددين كحراكيين وحقوقيين وكمدافعين هيومن رايتس ديفندرز عن الحقوق الفلسطينية المكفولة بالدستور. لا يوجد مواطنة فلسطينية، يوجد عصابة تحكم هذا بنظام سياسي، نظام عصابات، نظام أبرتايد، هم وكلاء للاحتلال، وأنتم جزء من هذه المؤامرة على الشعب الفلسطيني. لا تختلفون عن الاحتلال لأنكم تخضعوا للصهيونية الدولية في دعمكم المالي وتثبيت هذه السلطة التي تدعون أنها هناك حريات، وهي تقمعنا وتأتينا ملثمين على دوار المنارة وفي الخليل لحتى مجرد لأننا أردنا أن نعبر عن رأينا. أنتم جزء من المشكلة، وعليك أن تعطي فعلا فعل مغاير لكلامك الذي سئمناه من 48 وتتجاوز عن كلام بان كيمون الذي دائما تعبرون عن قلقكم وتبيعون كلاما وهما وأفعالكم تختلف عن الواقع والحقوق.
شكرا. ارجو الالتزام بالوقت، احنا طلبنا دقيقتين، بدك توصل فكرته بالوقت المحدد، يعني اعتقد انه يعطي غيره المجال. اخت هند خوري تفضلي، ارفع الميوت. ايوه
انميوت. اوكي. شكرا كثير لهذا اللقاء. اذا تسمحوا لي بدي احكي بالانجليزي. أول شيء نحن طبعاً بنقدر القيم. We appreciate the values of the European Union and we hope one day we will live up to these values of democracy and human rights. But on the other hand, as much as I appreciate the support was given to building a state, a Palestinian state alongside Israel, let's face it, I mean, every other observer says that the two-state solution is impossible because the geography has disappeared over so many years since Oslo. And not only that, not only the two-state possibility is disappearing, we have serious regressions of all indicators. I mean, let's see what is happening with democracy. That's what the EU says it supports. They have first undermined democracy, as some other colleagues have said, in the first elections in 2006. On human rights, we have so many reports on human rights violations, and yet our human rights continue to be violated. Let's not talk about Gaza. Let's talk about Jerusalem, where the EU published by its representatives a report on Jerusalem on a yearly basis, and these reports continue to stay in the shelves. I would like to, I think I was a bit nervous about the response of the EU representative, whom I respect very much, on regarding the three conditions of the quartet. I mean, this is such a partial view of international law. How can it be that we have to recognize Israel, and we actually did through the PLO, and look what we got, but why is this a condition when Israel doesn't recognize us? The right to self-determination in international law is given to both Palestinians and Israelis. About violence, why we look at Palestinian resistance as violence, and we continue to say, the Europeans and others, that Israel has the right to defend itself, when we live state violence that is well recorded on a daily basis, making our lives impossible. And the recognition of international law, Israel clearly violates international law on an hourly basis, not only daily, suffocating our lives and denying us even the hope for a better future. So, I mean, I think the EU need to be a little bit more honest. I mean, our world today cannot afford, if I may say this hypocrisy, we cannot afford it anymore. We need to be serious about democracy and human rights, and we hope that the EU will review its stance, because I think all the countries who support, give lip service to international law and human rights have been discredited. I mean, look at what these young people have been saying. You have to face the reality that governments in the West cannot continue to behave this way because they are being discredited in the view of at least the developing world and all these countries, not only in Palestine. Look what's happening in the whole region. I mean, societies have been destroyed in front of our own eyes. And not
شكرا جزيلا. دكتور عقل تفضل.
شكرا جزيلا. يعني أنا بدي أسأل ضيفنا العزيز سؤال حول يعني الموقف الاتحاد الأوروبي، كما تفضل هو داعم للقضية الفلسطينية ويقدم مساعدات وكل هذا الكلام الصحيح، لكن سياسيا ما زال الموقف الاتحاد الأوروبي ليش أسميه قاصر، لكن لماذا لا يعترف الاتحاد الأوروبي بالدولة الفلسطينية في حدود 4 من حزيران وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية التي تدعم هذا الموقف قرارات كثيرة من الشرعية الدولية؟ لا نرى هذا الاعتراف. هناك برلمانات دول كثيرة قررت أن تعترف بالدولة الفلسطينية وتركت هذا الموضوع لحكوماتها التي لا تتخذ أي خطوة في هذا الاتجاه. يتذرعون الأوروبيين بأنهم يريدون أن يتخذوا موقفا موحدا في كل دول الاتحاد الأوروبي، ونحن نعلم أن أوروبا ليست موحدة، والمستجدات في السياسة وخاصة ممارسات الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية يعني تشير إلى أنه أوروبا لسه في مخاوف جدية على هذه الوحدة الشكلية اللي قائمة. احنا قضيتنا صحيح عندنا اشكالات اقتصاديه وبحاجه لمساعدات وميزانيه السلطه وكله، لكن احنا موضوعنا سياسي بالاساس، ولذلك ارجو ان يجيب كيف يرى الاتحاد الأوروبي إمكانية الاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية قبل فوات الأوان، لأنه إسرائيل من خلال سياسة الاستيطان وتغيير الحقائق على الأرض والقمع وكل هذا، حتى متحدثين قبل تحدثوا عن أنه حتى حل الدولتين أصبح في خطر. ما الذي سيفعله الاتحاد الأوروبي؟ شكرا.
شكرا. نعود إلى قطاع غزة. بدنا نأخذ جولة، ربما يعني نعطي المجال للحاز أكثر لغزة في هذه الجولة، نسمع من 3 إلى 5 مداخلات من غزة، ثم نعود إلى زوم، وبعد هذه الجولة نعطي المجال للسيد سفين يقدم يعني ردود حتى يعني لا نثقل عليه بكثرة أو مراكمة الأسئلة. دكتور عماد تفضل.
شكرا خليل. اسماعيل تفضل.
يعطيك العافية وشكرا أستاذ خليل. أنا إسماعيل الألماني باحث. سؤالين سريعات: كيف يتعاطى الاتحاد الأوروبي مع دعوة الرئيس الفلسطيني محمود عباس لعقد مؤتمر دولي للسلام برعاية مشتركة؟ السؤال الثاني: كيف ينظر الاتحاد الأوروبي إلى اتفاق الإطار الموقع بين وكالة تغويث وتشغيل لاجئين الأونروا مع الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، والذي ينتهك القانون الدولي وينتهك أساسيات إنشاء الأونروا؟ شكرا.
شكرا لك. محمد بعدين محمود وبعدين يحيى. فكرة.
محمد عوض افتح المايك.
محمد عوض الممثل الأعلى للسياسة الخارجية والأمنية للاتحاد الأوروبي جوزيف بوريل في تصريحات صحفية قبل عقب اجتماع مجلس العلاقات الخارجية للاتحاد الأوروبي بتاريخ 12/7/2021 قال: ينتظرون من إسرائيل تقديم وجهة نظر سياسية من أجل الصراع القائم. هلا يبدي يعني استغراب، يعني بعد أكثر من 70 عام من الصراع الاتحاد الأوروبي ينتظر تقديم وجهات نظر سياسية من الجانب الإسرائيلي. هلا السؤال انه هل سنرى قريبا مبادره من الاتحاد الاوروبي لدفع عمليه السلام بين اسرائيل والفلسطينيين الى الامام؟ شكرا.
شكرا. محمود تفضل.
يعطيكم العافيه دكتور. دكتور باستكمال سؤال الزميل يحيى، هناك حديث عن اتفاق مماثل يرغب الاتحاد الاوروبي توقيعه مع اداره الأونروا بذات الشروط الامريكيه، يرغب بفرضها على اداره الأونروا. موقف الاتحاد الاوروبي من هذا الموضوع، فعلا انتم بصدد توقيع اتفاق مماثل؟ ايضا اليوم كان في حديث عن تهديد اوروبي بتقليص 20 مليون دولار على السلطه الفلسطينيه ما لم تعزز المنهاج الفلسطيني بالتعايش مع اسرائيل. السؤال ايضا: ما هي خطواتكم تجاه اسرائيل فيما يتعلق بالتعايش مع الفلسطينيين؟ وهو الاهم بهذا الموضوع. السؤال الثالث والاخير فيما يتعلق بواقع حقوق الانسان في الارض الفلسطينيه. انتم ممول رئيسي للسلطه الفلسطينيه، هناك اكثر من قضيه حصلت، نزار بنات وغير نزار بنات. انتم كاتحاد اوروبي تراقبون اداء السلطه فيما يتعلق بحقوق الانسان؟
شكرا لك محمد. تفضل يحيى.
صباح الخير. المايك شغال؟ لا.
صباح الخير. يعني سؤال مباشر، طالما احنا ننظر لمنظمة التحرير هي الممثل الشرعي والوحيد للسلطة الفلسطينية، وانه الفصائل الفلسطينية موافقة على الدولة على حدود ال67، وهو ما شرعتموه انتم كأوروبيين بقراراتكم وشرعياتكم نحن نقبل به. لماذا تتذرعون بالانقسام وتعملون على دعمنا إنسانيا، رغم أن الدعم الإنساني والاقتصادي لا يمكن أن يكون إلا في إطار سياسي؟ إذن اجتمعتم في باريس عام 2017 واجتمعتم في ألمانيا اجتمعتم في أكثر من دولة حتى تدعموا حرية الشعب الفلسطيني، لكن هذا لم يحصل إلى الآن، وكأنكم ارتضيتم بالدور الأمريكي الذي رسمه لكم بأن تكونوا داعمين ماليا، ونحن كشعب فلسطيني لسنا لاجئين ولا طالبي مال، نحن طالبي حرية ووطن، ومن ثم نستطيع أن نطور قوانيننا ونعالج كل ما يحتاجه الشعب الفلسطيني. وشكرا.
شكرا يحيى. أشرف تفضل. تفضل.
يعطيكم العافيه. طبعا سؤال الاستاذ انه نشكر جهود الاتحاد الاوروبي على مدار سنوات طويله في معالجه الانقسام الفلسطيني ومشاكله واثاره على مدى 15 عاما في فلسطين، لكن بعد هذه المحاولات الحثيثه والطويله لم يتشكل لدى الاتحاد الاوروبي خبره عمليه وفعاله لتشكيل حلول عمليه ممكنه وجاده لمعالجه اثار هذا الانقسام بشكل عملي، بعيدا عن الاستنكارات والشجب وغيرها. ايضا فيما يتعلق بتبعات قيام عمليه ديمقراطيه حقيقيه على الارض الفلسطينيه، من برايك يتحمل هذه التبعات؟ نحن جميعا في الارض الفلسطينيه نعلم من الطرف الحقيقي لمنع هذه العمليه الديمقراطيه، لكن من وجهه نظرك كاتحاد اوروبي هذه العمليه الغير ممكنه منذ سنوات طويله في قضاء غزه والضفه الغربيه، من يقوم بتاجيل هذه المفاوضات من حين لاخر؟ ايضا بما يتعلق في الجانب الاسرائيلي، هل هناك قرارات ملزمه تتوجب على الاحتلال الاسرائيلي في الالتزام باي اتفاقيات او معاهدات ما بين الفلسطينيين والاسرائيليين، ولماذا تكون الاتفاقيات الملزمه والقواعد الامره فقط على الجانب الفلسطيني في هذا الخصوص ويتم الالتزام بها، ومن ثم يتم التهرب من الجانب الاسرائيلي ولا يوجد اي الزام عليه للالتزام بهذه القرارات انطلاقا للوصول الى عمليه تسويه سلميه حقيقيه جاده في السنوات الأخيرة؟
شكرا اشرف. اخر المتحدثين احمد وبعدين بنقل لك خليل
بس
عشان ما نرجعش ثاني للقاعة.
تيجي هون.
يعطيكم العافيه. شكرا مسارات على هذه الفرصه. انا يعني سؤالي باختصار مداخلتي، انا بعتقد انه من غير المجدي انه نتساءل كثيرا عن الدور الاوروبي اللي بعتقد انه ارتضى لنفسه انه يكون مسقوف بالاراده الامريكيه منذ عقود خلينا نقول. انا سؤالي فقط انه في ظل هذا العجز الاوروبي عن ممارسه اي دور حقيقي تجاه القضيه الفلسطينيه، الا يمكن القول انه لا اقل من ان يكون هناك دور للاتحاد الاوروبي في تعزيز حقوق الانسان والحريات واستخدام اليات الدعم التي يقدمها الشعب الفلسطيني لضبط ممارسات المنظومه السلطويه الموجوده في الضفه، والتي يجمع كثيرون في مختلف استطاعات الراي على دورها القمعي تجاه الحريات وتجاه حقوق الانسان.
شكرا. طلال عندك سؤال؟ اعطي طلال يطرح سؤاله.
طلال
سؤال واحد.
طلال
الضيف الكريم بعد ما اشكره على يعني استضافته اليوم، بس بدي اسال هل هناك فرق بين سياسه الاتحاد الاوروبي الخارجيه وسياسه الولايات المتحده الامريكيه؟ اذا كان هناك فرق او لتوضيح ما هو هذا الفرق. شكرا.
بصور.
شكرا طلال. شكرا لكل المتحدثين في القاعه. تفضل خليل.
شكرا. احنا عندنا حنستمع لضيف الله سؤاله او مداخلته، ثم نعود الى الضيف السيد السبيل لنسمع منه. تفضل ضيف الله.
السلام عليكم. أسعد الله مساكم جميعا. بداية أود أن أتدخل في قول الرجل التابع للاتحاد الأوروبي أن هناك في سياسة مختلفة، أنه هناك يوجد في تناقضات، وربما أن تكون أن الدور الإسرائيلي هو الحاجب الأساسي عن النشاطات الاتحاد الأوروبي في الشرق الأوسط وخاصة في الدول العربية. لا شك أنه الاتحاد الأوروبي يمشي على الشرعية الدولية التي تنص على أنه يوجد دولتين ثنائيتين، هي الدولة الإسرائيلية والفلسطينية، لكن إسرائيل في المقابل تحجب الكثير من النشاطات وتدعم المسار الثنائي بين العرب وإسرائيل. وهذا بلا شك أنه هذا تسعى إلى من أجل السلام من أجل الازدهار، لأنه السلام من أجل الازدهار يا أساتذتي تحجب الاتفاقية تاعت بيروت التي تنص على أن الاتفاق حل الدولتين على حدود 67. أرادت إسرائيل أن تحجب هذا الاتفاق عليه العرب، وتريد في نفس السياق أن تمشي على أن نحن لا يجب أن يكون وبعد أن يحل محله التفاوضات بين الفلسطينية والإسرائيلية على أساس التسوية. وهذا مفهوم خاطئ. لا نريد أن نصل إلى المربع الأساسي أن نقول لا كل الدول العربية لا يجب عليها أن تطبع وبعدها أن نصل إلى عملية تسوية سياسية. لا، يوجد على الطاولة شيء اسمه القدس، شيء اسمه اللاجئين، حق العودة وإلى آخره. يعني لا يحق لأمريكا أو أمريكا تدعم إسرائيل بالدور مثل ما دعمها ترامب وجريد كوشنر وغيرها من المحامي القانوني الذي وضعوا وغيرها كمان سفراء. يعني قالوا كثير إن إحنا بدنا في هناك معاناة للشعب الفلسطيني خاصة الشباب، يعني سوء الأحوال المعيشية، يعني أقل شيء يعني نقول لك سوء أحوال المعيشية للشباب، وهناك يوجد طموحات وإلى آخره من هذا البروز العاطفي وإلى آخره، وتروح وجاي على غزة حتى تشعر أنه يوجد معاناة. يا سيدي إن كان يوجد في معاناة يجب علينا أن احنا أول شيء نحل أول شيء الصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي. فإن نستوي على الحل واحتواء الصراع وإدارته ووقف هذه الأزمة فنحن جاهزون. إذا كان يوجد في حوار ثنائي مباشر، بس يجب أن يكون برضو موجود دول مثل السعودية والأردن ومصر حتى تكون شاهدة فعالة على أن تكون هناك في اتفاق تلزم إسرائيل بهذا هذا الصراع. القدس عن الطاولة ولا الطاولة لا يبقى هذا. فنحن الاتحاد الأوروبي يوجد اتفاقيات متناقضة، منها الاتفاقية نقول مثلا خلينا نقول ألمانيا وغيرها من عدة دول بعيدا عن بريطانيا وإيطاليا وفرنسا وإسلام، هذه الدول لأن هؤلاء الدول أيضا متناقضة في موقفها. فنحن نقول خلينا على أن يكون الاتحاد الأوروبي أن يتمسك بالقانون الشرعي حتى إلى التفاهمات مع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. هذا ما نريده ولا نطيل أكثر من ذلك. شكرا لك.
شكرا. قبل أن ننتقل إلى الضيف، لينا على تشات وضعت إشارة مهمة إلى مشروع الموشن، القرار اللي أقره مؤتمر حزب العمال البريطاني من يومين، واللي اعتبر إسرائيل دولة فصل عنصري وطالب بفرض عقوبات عليها، كما دعا إلى الاعتراف بدولة فلسطين. صحيح أن بريطانيا خارج الاتحاد الأوروبي، ولكن أيضا لو نستمع إلى رأي سيد سبين إلى أي مدى يمكن أن يكون ما حدث في مؤتمر حزب العمال البريطاني مؤشر على تحول قادم في الرأي العام الأوروبي بشكل عام، بطريقة يمكن أن تشكل عامل ضغط على صناع القرار على الأقل في دول الاتحاد الأوروبي الوازنة وذات التأثير. سيد سبين، أسئلة كثيرة بالتأكيد وجزء منها يعني انتقادي. نعطيك المجال للرد إذا ضل معنا وقت، لأنه احنا حننهي بحدود ساعة ونصف وسوف نلتزم بذلك. ممكن نأخذ سؤال أو سؤالين مرة ثانية، ولكن يعني تفضل.
Yeah, thank you very much, Khalid, and thank you very much. Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much for this, challenging questions. And I'm not sure I have time to respond to all of them, but they are very interesting, very ambitious. And of course, through the translation, I might have missed the nuances of some of the commentary, but so I apologize in advance if I actually do not always directly respond, but I will try to work only step by step. Bear with me, please. So there was a first a lady, unfortunately I don't know your name, sorry, otherwise I would like to address you in person. How long are you going to support the two-state solution? How long are you going to support any solution? I haven't seen yet any clear statement from the majority of Palestinians whether you want a two-state solution or a one-state solution. I haven't seen a single political party emerging in Gaza, in West Bank, in Israel, being very clear about what would actually mean a one-state solution. But I have seen polls. I have seen polls saying that a majority of young people under 35 actually are more interested in enjoying the same rights as any Israeli than having a two-state solution. But where is the party in the West Bank, in Gaza, calling for that? Where? Is Mr. Senwar doing this? Is Mr. Abbas doing that? No, none of them. Everybody repeats the entire political nomenclatura of the Palestinian political establishment repeats the two-state solution. And the international community accepts that. The only binding agreements and the only international resolutions speak about the two-state solution. Why should we, unilateral EU, as an international partner to solve the conflict, unilaterally say the two-state solution is over? You know who should say it's over? You should say it. And you should elect a leadership pronouncing it. And then this leadership needs to discuss with the Israelis whether actually another solution than a two-state solution is possible. So I put the ball right back into your court. This is you Palestinians having to decide this. It's not us speaking on behalf of you and making decisions on behalf of you. We can make our assessments regarding the feasibility. You can agree or disagree whether Oslo is dead or not. But so far, I have not seen any representative of Palestine saying the two-state solution is dead. I have seen many, many voices like yours saying it doesn't make sense. But this needs to be a political process. Second, you've asked a very important question. I'm very grateful for you to ask that question. The EU role in not making it possible to hold elections in East Jerusalem. Now I tell you something, dear audience. As a matter of fact, we were the only ones, not the Arabs, not the US, not anyone else, who actually went the extra mile. We had a high-level meeting in Israel with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tel Aviv, and we asked the Israeli government to officially comment on their obligations under Annex 5, Annex 2 of the Oslo Agreement, where it stipulated that Jerusalem has to have elections in 5 post offices, etc., etc. You know the story. As a matter of fact, immediately after our political démarche, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a press statement saying that so far the Israeli government has not taken a decision on that matter. So because of our pressure, they refused to take a decision which actually would violate their obligations under Oslo. However, the Palestinian authorities have unilaterally canceled the day after I had the meeting with President Abbas, the elections, claiming that the EU was not able to convince Israel to hold elections in East Jerusalem. That was not true. It was a unilateral decision of the Palestinian leadership to cancel the elections. It has nothing to do with us, because we are not the ones saying it cannot be in East Jerusalem, and we were able to get the Israelis to the point that they didn't take a decision. So that's very clear. I think we should correct this impression. We did everything to do that, and we were the only ones, and we continue to be the only ones who actually support elections in the West Bank, in Gaza, and East Jerusalem. We are the only ones. Nobody else does it, right? But so far, I failed to see other partners joining us. So please do not criticize the EU for that, because you don't have a better defender of the democratic course than us and me as a person here on the ground. So I take this very serious, because for me, this is absolutely necessary that we continue fighting for it. Now, in 2006, Hamas won the parliamentary vote. Why did the EU boycott it? Under the quartet principles. Very simple. As I said, under the quartet principles, we agreed that a government in charge of Palestinian affairs has to abide by international law, has to recognize Israel's right to existence, and has to renounce its violence. Since Hamas did not do that, we said, sorry, we cannot recognize you. And shortly thereafter, in 2007, Hamas expelled all Fatah members from Gaza. You know the story. So you may disagree or not disagree with that stance, but please be assured that we based our decision of recognizing a Hamas-led government at that time on these principles. Now let's ask ourselves the next question. What would be the EU stance right now? And that question was asked to me in the lead up to the elections in March and April this year. And I gave the following answer, and I repeat this answer to all of you. Let's have elections. A, parliamentary presidential. B, let's commit all political factions to participate peacefully in these elections. C, let's monitor these elections to the best of our knowledge. And C, let all parties accept the result of the elections. If this is the paradigm under which we operate, and at that time had no qualm and no concern whatsoever that Hamas would not do that, because all the statements of Hamas went in that direction, then they asked me, what would happen if Hamas would be in the government? And then I said the following, and I repeat this here. A new government coming out of democratic, free and fair and transparent elections, vetted by the international community, would say, I abide by international law, and I abide by all the agreements the Palestinian leadership with regard to solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are valid, and I insist on pursuing my political ambitions peacefully. On what ground could the EU then not cooperate with this government? Because that's the paradigm against which we cooperate with any government in the world. The issue is not Hamas or not. The issue is these three aspects for any new government. So let's cross that bridge. Let's have elections, and then let's see how to operate with this government. And that is important. And to this extent, I understand the dynamics in Palestine and of all the parties running for elections, including the one which had the list Jerusalem's Our Destiny, that was accepted. I have no doubts that for the time being, this has not changed, unless you convince me to the contrary. Mr. Abu Khabab, if I pronounce you correctly, you said, since the Biden administration doesn't have much of a plan, can the EU do something in the light of this, I would say, creeping annexation, pursuing Israeli settlements? I mean, I was in Susia in the West Bank near Hebron Hills the other day, where he protested against the lack of water to Palestinian people, while the illegal outposts of the settlers have running water all the time, where settlers, while we were there, were attacking the people, and I actually stood with the Palestinians and defending them and made statements about that. So I am seeing it with my first-hand eyes, and I think you haven't seen another representative of the EU speaking so vocal about violations of the Israelis on a daily basis. No other one has done so much in such a short period of time regarding statements. No other representative of the past 27 years here. So, and you can count on me that I will do that, because I do this not because we are friends, it's because I want to uphold international law, because that's what we're standing for. I want to uphold international human rights law. And I can count on the support of all my heads of missions here in Jerusalem and Ramallah and the EU at large. So we will continue fighting this. However, and I said this earlier on, when I explained why the EU not always has the capacity to act upon what it says. We are 27 independent member states, right? So we support nominally and in our explanations and statements international law, but when it comes to holding those accountable, of course, member states have different positions. We do judge, and that, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, is part of realpolitik. I'm sorry to say that. We do, of course, deal differently with China, with Russia, with Israel, with Turkey, with US, and Israel. Of course we do. And that is not saying that we ignore international law, but that's how realpolitik is. We strive our very best to try to have the same standard But very often, and you know that, it is not possible because we are 27 member states. We don't have a US president giving a presidential order or a decree or one US Congress. We have 27 parliaments in member states, 27 governments. So please bear with us if we don't always live up to expectations or if we can't live up to our own expectations. This is my daily frustration, but that is how the EU operates. This is an evolving project. Don't forget, 75 years ago, all these 27 countries were deeply in war, in a much more bloody war than Palestine and Israel ever was. 50 million people got killed. And a few days later, after 45 and the creation of the EU, France and Germany, enemies for hundreds of years, became the best friends. It is a process which takes step by step and lots of laborious work. It's not something which comes overnight. So creating a unified government in Europe is a historical achievement we are working on. And we haven't finished yet. So please bear with us, right? And don't expect us to be the US of Europe today. It is not possible. It's important that we continue supporting you, but unfortunately, we have our inefficiencies, we have our inconsistencies, we have our deficits. That's the reality we have to all face, as also Palestinians and the Israelis have. Mr. Ibrahim Hassel. We are not fair towards the Palestinian because we don't recognize their right to self-defense and fight against occupation. A very good point. Indeed, we signed up to international agreements whereby we allow people which suffer from oppression to actually resist against it. This is also part and parcel of other agreements, we as part of this community. However, nothing, my dear friend, justifies that groups in the West Bank, groups in Gaza, target civilians. Nothing justifies mortar and rocket attacks on civilian population in Ashdod, Ashkelon, Haifa, etc., etc. Nothing, right? I understand the frustration, disappointment, and deep entrenched feeling of being fragmented and of being hurt, but it does not justify killing of civilians, and nor does killing of civilians by Israeli is in any way justified. So when we talk about recognizing the right of resistance, we're not talking about recognizing the right of killing civilians. There's a big, big difference. There's a big, big difference. And when you listen to my statements I issue on a weekly basis regarding infringements and violations of Israel under Israel's law, I criticize the Israeli security forces for exactly doing that, harming civilians in violation of international law. And that is very important. So I think we need to make a distinction here. I think, and I can already say this here, because you also asked a question which your speaker afterwards, Firas Breivish, said about how can I honestly speak about supporting civil society if we attach conditions regarding terrorist financing? Now, dear colleagues, this is a very important topic you're raising here. Since 2001, the European Union decided to put a number of Palestinian groups, together with many, many other groups around the world, on a list which is called terrorist entities. Now, you may disagree or not disagree with that. And indeed, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Qassam brigades are on that list. Every 6 months, this is being revisited. By the way, institutions, entities, individuals can ask for a revisiting this list and taking them off that list, but this is a political decision taken by 27 member states every 6 months. Now, for the time being, nothing has changed. All these entities are on that list. As long as these entities, including Islamic Jihad, Hamas, etc., are on that list, but also others around the world, as long as this is the case, we under EU law cannot provide funding directly or indirectly to this list. So this existed since 2001 in all our NGO agreements with Masarat, with Pingo, and you name it, PCHR, Al-Haq, we always had this as part and parcel of the general conditions. Now in 2019, we were asked to make it explicit. It was always implicit. It was part of general conditions. And we added an article and we asked NGOs to actually formalize their agreement with this. This was nothing new. We never changed anything. We just made it more explicit. And then a big row started where we said, oh, you add new conditions. We never added new conditions. We still maintain that you cannot fund directly or indirectly, meaning providing financial assets. I'm saying financial assets. I'm not talking about other benefits. Financial assets to entities listed on the sanction list ever since 2001. And this is a worldwide condition. This applies to the Taliban, to Hezbollah, it applies to those terrorist entities in Colombia, etc., everywhere in the world. It applies even to Israeli entities which are considered terrorists. So I understand that there's a misunderstanding here, but please, it is not something which is directed against Palestinians. It's a worldwide fight against terrorism. Nothing to do with Palestine, it's worldwide. And these conditions apply everywhere in the world. I had explained this ad nauseum to many, many Palestinian interlocutors ever since I arrived here, but I'm very happy that you asked that question, and I can do more if more clarification is needed. So now comes Firas Braiwish. You make an understandable complaint about legal inconsistencies between presidential decrees and the Palestinian constitution and the legal framework. I will not comment on that. I am not a specialist of Palestinian constitutional law. But let me say something, it's very important. You said the PLO has no legitimacy. We never voted for that. Dear Firas Braiwish, this is your decision and your point. But as far as the international community is concerned, the PLO is the only recognized representative of the Palestinians. You may like it or not, but that's how it's the case. And that's the reason why I'm the most strongest supporter of elections. Because the elections, as they were foreseen in January 2021, foresaw parliamentary, presidential, and PNC elections of the PLO in order to democratize the entire spectrum of political leadership. So what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying. We need to legitimize the political Palestinian leadership in all its shapes, forms, and bodies. So whether you like or not, the PLO so far is the only body able to sign international agreements. And it delegated this capacity to the PA when it comes to financial cooperation, at least in the West Bank and in Gaza. All the more important to have an accountable parliament holding to account the executive, meaning the president and the prime minister and his government, his or her government, depending on who the prime minister is. But then you say, we are spending, and allow me to be a little provocative here, and I appreciate the frustration. By the way, Nizar Banat, who said the same thing, what you're saying, and you know who was the first diplomat who went immediately when he was killed? I went, I saw his daughter, I saw his family, I expressed solidarity. I was the first, before anybody else was there, and certainly no PA official. Right, so I'm very much defending Nizar Banat's right to criticize us, the EU, for having provided so many funds to the PA. But now comes my question to you. Okay, we have 300 million euros on average spent for the past 10 years. Okay, what would we have done? Not spending them? Do we withhold all the funds, social allowances for vulnerable poor families in Gaza and West Bank, East Jerusalem hospitals where all the referral cancer patients are there in the midst of a pandemic? Nothing for salaries and pensions, nothing for Gas for Gaza projects or Gaza desalination projects. Shall we just stop everything because we think there's a democratic legitimacy deficit? Shall we do that? Who is then funding it? You could say, well, then Israel has to take over. Okay, be my guest. Then try to convince the Israelis to funding, on average, 600 million euros a year with the EU and the member states did. So if we are radical about it, let's stop all the funding. And then who is going to support the Palestinians? Who is going to support the Palestinian state? Please give me a good answer what you think. And if we were to apply conditionality to the Palestinian modus of governance, we, I think, need to be seen as being equally tough on the Israeli side. You cannot be tough on the Palestinians and be lenient on the Israeli side in terms of financial benefits, access to commercial preference, etc., etc. right? So, I mean, this is a very, very important but very complex question with huge and far-reaching implications. Madam Khentouri, the two-state solution is not feasible anymore. Well, I spoke about this. I'm not sure that the reports stay in the shelves. Certain reports are internal, like our East Jerusalem report, and they are not meant to be public, but other reports are actually very public. Every 6 months, we publish a report on demolitions, on settler violence, every 6 months, based on the best of statistics we get from international organizations, from NGOs, from human rights actors, and which are vetted against sort of all the statistics. So we are quite transparent on these matters, I think, and we actually, you know, try to inform not just our political decision makers in Europe, but also the wider public, including the Palestinian and Israeli public, about what perceive as serious infringements and violations of the Palestinians' right to all kinds of universal human rights. So then you ask, how can we recognize Israel and not Palestine? There's a big difference, unfortunately, here. And I understand the viewpoint of Palestinians saying, we need to recognize Israel, but they don't recognize us. That's unfair. I understand that. So I'm not going to enter in that kind of dilemma because I see the point you're making. Now, let's step outside this dilemma and let's look at the international community. And I will also reply to a question someone else asked here. The European Union as a body, as a supranational body, cannot recognize any entity as an independent state unless all 27 allow us to do. While individual countries can do so, and so far 9 countries actually have done so in their prerogative as doing it as a state. The last one was Sweden in 2014, I think. No other state ever since has done that of the European Union member states, and the EU cannot recognize Palestine as an independent state because of that lack of consensus. So that's the reason when I spoke to my interlocutors in the PA, the Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and others, to the President himself, I said, the only way how you can move this is by convincing individual member states, right? And that is your work. I cannot do it because I depend as a civil servant of the European Union on the decision of the political masters here, right? So this is something where the PA has lots of homework. I understand that. And this brings me now to the resolution which Khalid Shaheen mentioned of the Labour Party, recognizing the state. Very good, but that's the way forward. Individual states have to do it. And the more we have a critical mass, the easier it will be for international and supranational bodies to take a stance on that. But unless we have that critical mass, we will not be, as an EU, in a position to do so. So EU needs to be more honest about democracy and human rights. Yeah, I mean, of course. I think I cannot be more honest than I was saying, but the question is, let's come back to the walk the talk. I don't need to repeat myself, right? So of course, I would love us to be more consistent between what we say and what we do. But I explained the reason why that is unfortunately right now not possible, right? And you may criticize us for that, but I don't need to say mea culpa. This is something which is part and parcel of the modus operandi EU. We are your most steadfast partner, but we are not a US government which can decide by the stroke of the pen. We need to convince every single other member of our government, meaning the 27 member states. And please realize that when you try to voice criticism towards the EU. This session for me is an information session for you as well, right? You need to understand what our limitations are. Otherwise, you have completely unrealistic expectations. And that doesn't help you, it doesn't help us. And you cannot integrate, properly process what we can do for you. You know, we need to, there is a bit of realpolitik which you need to realize. Otherwise, we have a problem in our dialogue, in our communication. And I'll be very honest with you. And I appreciate these very critical questions, but that allows me also to say, you need to understand us as well to be able to, you know, communicate with us in the most effective and plausible manner. Dr. Akel, why doesn't the EU recognize the Palestinian state under the 67 borders? I think I replied to this question already. What can the EU do to fight the erosion of the two-state solution? Well, ever since I came here, I asked myself that question. Now, I give you an answer which is not an EU answer yet, but is an answer which I, as a professional who has been working 30 years as a diplomat and development practitioner, I came to the conclusion that if you want to move decision makers in your capitals, the only way to do it is via changing the narrative about a given conflict and building up political pressure at the home front. And for the past 18 months or so, you have seen a shift in paradigm. People have been speaking of Israel becoming an apartheid state. That has never been said before. This is a new paradigm. Members of the Democratic Party in the US Congress say that. Members in the European Parliament say this. Senators say that. Even some politicians say this. Of course, the EU as a diplomat cannot say that because we don't have an official position on that one. But there are numerous academia, think tanks, politicians saying that. And that, of course, puts pressure on decision makers in Europe and elsewhere. And that, of course, increases a pressure on decision makers to justify why they don't do something or do something more. So in a way, this leads me to something which you see also in the US right now, where you see this Black Lives Matter movement becomes increasingly important, and where they say they equate it with the Palestinian Lives Matter movement, so to speak, meaning a universal quest for applying equal rights for all. So not the question of two-state solution, one-state solution, it's equal rights for all. It cannot be that a Palestinian citizen, a resident in Susia village in the South Hebron Hills, does not get free access of water or access of water, while the illegal outposts, even under Israeli or illegal outpost, 2 kilometers away, has running water all day. This is not fair. This is a representation of deeply entrenched equal, unequal rights for those who are Israeli settlers and those who are Palestinian residents. So the call for equal rights for all, which is a universal call, in full compliance with the international human rights regime, where these human rights, political and civil, economic and social and cultural, are indivisible, inalienable, interrelated and universal. These 4 categories apply equally to Palestinians. And that's important to call for that. So maybe, and that's a question I'm having myself, you as Palestinian activists, as youth, as the future of the country, maybe that's the battle you have to fight. Not for two-state solution, but equal rights for all. And maybe what does it mean? Is that meaning we're going into one-state reality and then I want as Palestinian live as an Israeli citizen under one-state situation? I don't know. Or confederation? I don't know. But it's not for us from the EU to decide on that. It's for the Palestinians to decide. And I come back to my point for democratic legitimacy. The best way to do this is start political movements which can channel and represent your view on these things. And as I said early on, so far, there's not a single political movement which actually represents this, what I'm hearing here by all of you, or by many of you. So, yeah, there was, and now it's difficult because then there are only young activists from Gaza, and I don't have their names. A young gentleman said, the President Abbas' invitation for international conference, what would we do? Well, first of all, I cannot speak on behalf of my decision makers in Brussels or in Berlin or in Copenhagen, etc. I don't know. So far, we haven't received an invitation for a conference. Whether I think it's a good idea, I don't know whether it's mature enough. You have heard that Prime Minister Bennett says, I don't want to talk peace and two-state solution with the Palestinians. While Yair Lapid says, yes, that is something we could talk about. So there are inconsistencies in this very government we are supposed to work with. You are supposed to work with. So I don't have an answer to that question. And secondly, partnership with the US. Dear colleagues, dear friends, let's get over the fact that for 4 years, Mr. Trump and his deal of the century infested the entire political climate. We have a new administration in Washington. And let's give them the chance of developing a new strategy and a partnership. But it will be impossible, and dear friends, that's the only thing you have to realize. It will be impossible to have a lasting peace with Israel and between the Palestinians and Israel without the US. The EU on its own will definitely not be able to promote this. And that's the lessons of 45 years of military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, right? So the US has to work with us and we have to work with the US. That's very important. And we need to be realistic as well what can be done. And maybe it's not possible tomorrow, but let me say something here about, and I shared this also with Israeli friends and colleagues. What I'm missing on the Israeli side is a long-term vision on how to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And there are only two factors you need to take into consideration. A, demographic change, meaning the relatively high reproduction rate of the Palestinian population, notably in Gaza, but also in general. And B, climate change. Climate change will, of course, limit over the years to come dramatically access to land, water, energy. Unless you find a political solution which either allows for sharing these resources, allowing for technological innovations like desalination plants all across the Gaza side, like we have it in Israel, and widening the access to arable land and energy access as well. Unless we do that, it is impossible to imagine that in 20 years from now, we have an ever-growing Palestinian population being twice as much with a very limited access to natural resources, which is shrinking by the day. Impossible, it will explode. So by simple mathematics and extrapolation of these factors, this conflict has to find a solution. And it will have to be a political solution. The question is how painful it will be, how quick it will be. And that's the question. Again, and I come back to the initial argument. The best way the Palestinians can do is to unify their leadership, speak with one voice, end the divide, and legitimize and democratize leadership. That is the single most important measure for the Palestinians to be able to address these challenges. So, Mohammed, this name I know because he was on. Invitation for the US to push the peace process. I replied to this already. I'm very happy to relay this message, but there is, of course, a colleague of mine who will visit Palestine and Israel as of next week, the European Union Special Representative of Mr. Borrell, the High Representative, Sven Koopmans, the Dutch diplomat, who will come here for 10 days, and he will continue talking, of course, with the Israelis and the Palestinians and other regional partners in trying to foster that kind of understanding that we need to address this peace process, irrespective of the impediments and obstacles we see on a daily basis. So, but it has to be done in the context of the quartet and with the key players in the region, notably Egypt and of course also Jordan. This is very important that we be realistic about what we can do. So then another activist spoke about the UNRWA and the EU agreement, and he made an important reference. Indeed, yesterday, the budget committee of the European Union adopted with the slightest of margins, 20-19, a resolution cutting funds for UNRWA by 20 million. Now, please be reminded, this is the budget committee of the parliament. This is not the European Parliament. We're going to have a vote on the 20th of October in the plenary of the parliament, where this will be brought to a plenary vote. And I encourage all of you, activists, friends of the Palestinian cause, to make best use of your means, your advocacy groups in Brussels and elsewhere, in order to ensure that there is no such thing. But it is a matter for, of course, the political forces, the civil society forces, and the popular forces defending the Palestinian cause, that UNRWA enjoys the sufficient support they need in order to satisfy the survival needs, education, health needs of 5 million Palestinian refugees in 5 different countries. And then you said, do you actually, you monitor the human rights situation in the West Bank and Gaza? I invite you to follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and on the European Union and the Palestinians Facebook. You will see every week, basically, a statement or a tweet or declaration from me and my colleagues regarding a given violation. Unfortunately, I had to be more active than I wanted to in the past because of these violations. every day. And by the way, this applies also to Gaza. We several times criticized the de facto authorities for issuing death sentences, which we consider inhumane, unacceptable international law, and contrary to the obligations the Palestinian leadership has entered into under the International Rights Conventions. So we continue monitoring this very closely. We attend all the case hearings. As I said, I was the first and only diplomat who went to Nizar Banat to assembly to pay the condolences. I was the first and only diplomat who went to Al-Haq, the poor Palestinian was killed, the autistic killed in East Jerusalem. We are defending this on a human and on a political level. So I don't think we can do more than we do at that level, but we monitor very, very carefully and inform Brussels about these things. So there was another activist speaking about, can you find tangible solutions to deal with disunity? Well, I think at the beginning of my sort of introduction, speaking about elections, I thought I gave one with reference to the electoral law of 15th of January 2021, where I said, there is a provision which allows people who are supported by movements who do not want to sign up to the PLO principles, but as individuals can sign up to these principles in order to be able to serve in a unity government. That's a very concrete, specific proposal, which I think many in the Palestinian political landscape would be ready to endorse. And I know I've spoken to many who would be very happy to see this being actually realized and materialized. Yeah, what compels Israel to oblige with its commitments under Oslo and Paris and other agreements? Well, I may come back to the point that, of course, I would love also to Israel to do that. But here again, I think unless we find a proper, how shall I say, equilibrium and comprehensive package of carrots and sticks, both towards the Palestinians and the Israelis, it will be impossible to ensure that these infringements and violations of international law and bilateral agreements can be stopped. It's important that, and this is something I agree with you, we as international community, not just the EU, international community at large, including the US, have to do. And that's the reason why the partnership with the US is so important. It cannot be done by us on our own. This is impossible. And preferably, I would like also to see the Arab states. This is also very important in the context of one of the questions regarding normalizations, which I think one of you asked as well. Then Ahmed asked us about, he said, in light of the EU action on the political front, and I explained this, why don't we criticize more the human rights violations in Israel? Well, we do. I said so. As I said, I think we criticize them quite often. Also before international fora, the Human Rights Council, Israel criticizes us all the time that we are criticizing them, in an unfair fashion. Every time the EU is being criticized by Israel because of our, principled stance towards what we perceive as non-compliance with their obligation as an occupying power in the territories. So I think we have there a contentious issue with Israel. So I don't think I need any lessons from anyone regarding us not criticizing Israel. The question is, what do we do with the criticism? That's another question, but I think I replied to this question already. Yes, and I spoke about our critical statements on the human rights issues and violations, both in Gaza and the West Bank. Then Yafala Assad, you make reference to the Peace for Prosperity plan and the Trump plan. I think this is over, dear Yafala. This is the past. Trump is dead. He's politically dead. I hope he never returns, but he is politically dead for the time being. There is no deal of the century, right? This is not there anymore. There is no Mr. Kushner dealing it. There are normalization agreements, and here comes the issue. I don't know whether you hinted at that. Probably translation didn't capture your intent properly, or to the extent I was able to understand it. But I fully agree that we need the Arab states on board. Even if the US and the EU were to see eye to eye on every single item and trying to promote the peace process, we need not just Egypt and Jordan, we need also the Gulf countries to pull at the same end of the rope. And probably the normalization agreements are an opportunity, at least that what initially UAE and Bahrain said, they want to use it as a token to basically say, okay, we normalize relations with Israel, but in turn, Israel needs to basically live up to your obligations under the agreed international agreed parameters. So far, I agree with you, this hasn't taken place. Yes, I agree with you, but I think it's something also where one would need more to work on the Arab and Gulf partners, basically your brothers and sisters who need to defend your cause, like under the Arab Peace Initiative. So that's very important as well, that some homework needs to be done if that is actually possible. Yeah, I think I covered, Khalil, I think I covered really everything. Sorry for being so lengthy, but the challenge was very much, and I wanted to go because these questions were very pertinent. They, of course, attack the EU, but, and I appreciate that. I like confrontational exchanges. Yet, I hope I was able to clarify a number of issues. I'm open for these kinds of exchanges because it helps me to understand where you're coming from as audience in all these diversities. And I hope I was able to clarify certain things, what the EU can do and what you cannot do. And I think it's important for you to understand our own limitations as well. Well, thank you very much for this exchange.
شكرا thank you شكرا جزيلا. يعني أنا أعتقد أنه هذه واحدة من أهم الورشات اللي أتاحت أو وفرت فرصة لممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي في فلسطين أنه يتحدث في حوار مباشر مع نحو 100 مشارك فلسطيني سواء في القاعة في قطاع غزة أو عبر زوم، وهذا العدد الكبير 15 متحدث كان وجه يعني أسئلة. أعتذر لمن يريد كان أن يتحدث، خاصة لنا الصديقة سحر قواسمي لأنه وقتنا يعني إن انتهى. أشكر مرة أخرى السيد سيمن لأنه فعلا وضح يعني الكثير من مواقف الاتحاد الأوروبي وهذه العقلية المنفتحة التي تعامل فيها مع يعني الشباب بشكل خاص، وقدم توضيحات مهمة لموقف الاتحاد الأوروبي، وهذا ما نحتاج إليه يعني فعلا. مرة أخرى شكرا لمؤسسة فريدرش إيبرت اللي تعاوننا معها أتاح لنا تنظيم سلسلة من الورشات حول الموضوع الفلسطيني في ظل المتغيرات المحلية والإقليمية والدولية. شكرا للمترجم. وأختم بأنه إحنا في ورشات مسارات هي ورشات حوارية لا مكان فيها للشتائم، يعني الذي يريد أن يشتم يفضل ألا يشارك في ورشات مسارات. شكرا لكم كلكم. إحنا بذكر إنه عندنا ورشة أخرى، افحصوا إيميلاتكم، في عندنا ورشة أخرى الساعة 6 مساء ضمن يعني برنامج البدائل وخيارات الذي ينفذه يعني مركز مسارات. شكرا لكم.